Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our online service for NorthStar community. And it's great to be here. Beautiful day today, and just wonderful time to recognize and live with gratitude about our one and only loving God. So today we're going to talk about toxic shame, and I know it's one of those subjects that's so much fun to talk about, but I think for most of us, toxic shame is what drives much of our addiction and our addictive behaviors. And so it's important to understand what it is so we can start recognizing it. Because one writer talked about how our inner critic, our shame-based living, our toxic shame, whatever word you want to use, are like the whir of the air conditioner. You don't even know you're doing it. You don't know the things you're doing to yourself destructively. And so then the problem is anytime we have unresolved pain, anytime we have unresolved disconnection between our feelings and our thoughts, that's when we act out. That's when we become addictive. That's when living with addiction is easier than not living with addiction. And addiction is so difficult. It's not really hard to understand, but it's so difficult to overcome. And just understanding and becoming aware of how your toxic shame drives your life can be so powerful and helps you to let go of some of the destructive behaviors and thinking that you do. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more today. The other thing we have to realize is that living with toxic shame so much of the time is unresolved anger, unresolved pain, unresolved history. And one of the things we forget is that it's a physiological reaction. I mean, our cortisol levels are too high, our epinephrine, norepinephrine's too low. I mean, we go on and on with this. So the point is we just have to start figuring out ways to acknowledge that we have toxic shame and then figure out things to do to overcome it. So I'm going to read The Prodigal Son, which is just to me the greatest of all stories in the Bible. So again, for you that weren't raised in the church, if you weren't raised with the Bible, if you weren't, all these things, Jesus, who we believe is our Messiah and our Savior, talked a lot in parables because people couldn't hear him otherwise. And even then it was confusing, but he could put so much into 2-paragraph stories that to get his point across. And so now the prodigal son's a little more than 2 paragraphs, but a lot more. But it's also helpful to kind of understand where you are in the Bible. And so Luke 15 is the chapter. And the first part of the chapter, the quote is that Jesus was speaking and hanging with people of disreputable reputations, right? So they were the addicts of the time. They were all those people. And that's who were just so enthralled with Jesus and what he had to say because they sensed the love of God. They sensed that he could see through all the acting out, all the craziness that we do when we're addicted, and he could see us, our true hearts. And I will tell you, I believe this at the very core of my being, that almost every addict, underneath all their bravado, underneath all of our acting out, underneath all of our meanness and all things that we do, we're actually very sensitive, very caring individuals who have been hurt deeply. And we've been hurt so deeply that we don't want to deal with it because the pain's too high. And so what we choose to do is come up with behaviors to avoid pain as opposed to acknowledge the pain and deal with it. And so the same subject goes over and over with us. I don't care about your childhood. I just care about how your childhood affects you today. For many of us out there, we're walking around carrying pain from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 50 years ago, no matter how old you are. When you hear that logically, it doesn't make sense. But of course, we all know how it makes sense. Trauma and abandonment are so painful. They destroy our self-being. They destroy who we are. It confuses us to the goodness in us. It's easy for us to not be able to recognize the good parts of us, and all we can see is the negative things that we do, the negative things we are. When the fact is, underneath all that, you're a good and decent person. And I know it's true because you wouldn't be watching this if you weren't. It's just that you're having trouble overcoming all that pain. So today, I hope as we talk about toxic shame, and give you the permission to let go of your pain, to see it, acknowledge it, and then hopefully you'll find ways to connect to help you get past it. So the prodigal son, again, I got off track there. So Luke 15, the Pharisees, the church people today are complaining because Jesus is hanging with people that with bad reputations. So obviously, again, hanging with addicts, hanging out with the troubled people. So Jesus then tells them about a couple other parables, and then this is one he ends with. And then this is just before he talks about his second coming. Before he talks about the Pharisee and the tax collector, before he talks about the workers in the vineyard, all these things. But it's fairly not far away. It's the week of when he is put to death and crucified. And so the point to all this is, and the thief on the cross is such an important one for us in the recovery world, because the thief on the cross who was being crucified next to Jesus, who was a bad person, lots of bad decisions, I'm sure very addicted, very destructive, but he sees Jesus' true self, that true love, the Messiah in him, and he asks Jesus if he can join him in heaven, and Jesus said, yes, you will be with me. So I'm trying to give you permission here to quit beating yourself up so much. Certainly you need to stop. You got to stop the addictive behaviors. You got to stop the addiction use. But you can't do that if you're feeling so much shame about you. And so I'm hoping that's what you're hearing today, is that you don't have to do all that. You don't. God doesn't keep score. God is love. He knows your heart. He's there for you. It's you that needs to decide to turn your life and will over to God. You know, and maybe not even from the subject of being saved. Just your life will be better. There are so many reasons to stop the nuttiness, the craziness you're doing. And as you may recall, if you've been on here before, or if you're new, we break addiction into 3 categories. We have substances, which we all are familiar with. The other one is compulsive behaviors, where we do destructive things, or they may not be destructive behaviors by themselves, but because they become a compulsion to us, we just cannot do it, and we do it too much, too long, whatever, then that becomes a problem. And then, like, for instance, if I go out and shop because I need new shoes, that's one thing. If I go to all the thrift stores every week and I buy every pair of shoes I can find, and I now have 300 pairs of shoes in my house, that's a problem. That's compulsive. And of course, as we become addicted to people, and that's probably the biggest addiction of all, because of our brokenness, because of the pain in our lives, because of the trauma and abandonment we've experienced, it's easy for us to overconnect with people, idealize other people, or completely withdraw from people. Whatever it is, though, we don't know how to create healthy relationships, and we certainly don't know how to find healthy people. And so we have to keep thinking about that. What does that mean? So my simple definition for healthy people are people in our lives who want what's best for us. They don't promote our addiction. They don't agree with us every time we're being nutty with our addictive behaviors, and they don't take advantage of us. They love us and want what's best for us. Doesn't mean they're real healthy either all the time. It just means that you're somehow healthy together. Because you know, and I know, if you're watching this, you're in relationships right now that are toxic, and you need to get out of them, but you don't have the will, the courage to do that. But I hope that you will. It takes courage to do it, but you can do it. So let me read the prodigal son. And I hope what you hear is a couple things going on here. Obviously, the father represents God, and the prodigal son represents all of us with all our dumb, addictive behaviors. And the brother, represents that, just the people who don't want what's best for us and who have a hard time. And, I don't know. I was kidding about it. There's people out here who are happy to be unhappy, and that's who he is. And so you don't have to please these people. The point is, you need to connect with God. So let's read this real quick. Then he said, there once was a man who had 2 sons. The younger son said to his father, "Father, I want right now what's coming to me." So the father divided the property between them. It wasn't long before the younger son packed his bags and left for a distant country. There, undisciplined and dissipated, he wasted everything he had. None of us would know that story, right? After he'd gone through all his money, there was a bad famine all through that country, and he began to feel it. He signed on with a citizen there who assigned him to his fields to slop the pigs. He was so hungry he would have eaten the corn cobs in the pig slop, but no one would give him any. I think we could say he was close to rock bottom there. That brought him to his senses. He said, all those farmhands working for my father sit down to 3 meals a day, and here I am starving to death. I am going back to my father. I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against God. I've sinned before you. I don't deserve to be called your son. Take me on as a hired hand. He got right up and went home to his father. So he did take action. When he was still a long way off, his father saw him. His heart pounding, he ran out, embraced him, and kissed him. The son started his speech. Father, I've sinned against God. I've sinned before you. I don't deserve to be called your son ever again. But the father wasn't listening. He was calling to the servants, quick, bring a clean set of clothes and dress him. Put the family ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Then get a prize-winning heifer and roast it. We're going to feast. We're going to have a wonderful time. My son is here, given up for dead and now alive. Given up for lost and now found. And they began to have a wonderful time. All this time, his older brother was out in the field. When the day's work was done, he came in. As he approached the house, he heard the music and dancing. Calling over one of the houseboys, he asked what was going on. He told him, your brother came home. Your father has ordered a feast. Barbecued beef, because he has him safe and sound. The older brother stomped off in an angry sulk and refused to join in. His father came out and tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen. The son said, look, for how many years I've stayed here serving you, never given you one moment of grief, but have you ever thrown a party for me and my friends? Then this son of yours, who's thrown away your money on whores, shows up and you go all out with a feast. The father said, son, you don't understand. You're with me all the time, and everything that is mine is yours. But this is a wonderful time, and we had to celebrate. This brother of yours was dead, and he's alive. He was lost, and now he's found. So I hope you hear in this story all the things you've done. Because again, if you're addicted, if you're living with addictive thinking, you have done crazy, nutty, destructive things, and you still may be. You don't have to hide them from God. He already knows anyway. He loves you. He knows your heart. I just wished I could get that across to all of us, that you don't need to be walking around in fear all the time, that you'll never ever be forgiven by God. And I think sometimes we confuse the terms. I think when you read about the fear of God, sometimes I think you could replace that and say in awe of God. You are so in awe of him that he's fearful. I hope that makes sense. If you ever think about it, the capacity of love that God has is it's incomprehensible to any of us. So we talk about trying to get a rich, full, meaningful life, and here's a non-rich, full, meaningful life list. I am anxious and resentful. I wake up afraid and misunderstood. I'm ready to do my job perfectly, or maybe I'll call in sick. I use substances, but I hide it so no one knows, or at least I think no one knows. I'm focused on myself and my hurts, habits, and hangups, to the exclusion of all else. I only make decisions built around my toxic shame. I will not allow my mind to linger on things that are unimportant. It's like recovery. I will not rely on anyone or anything except my addictions. Oh, do I know those? I may not know what I'm going to do today, but I know where my stuff is. I will not be vulnerable to mistakes, and if I do make mistakes, I will deny them. So you can see how destructive that is, and but you guys can relate to it. I know when we read this list at NorthStar in person, everybody was just kind of, yeah, wincing. So one of the biggest mistakes we make when we become addicted is we withdraw from people. And what we do is we build a wall around ourselves. And the problem with the wall is it keeps us safe emotionally, but it also makes us lonely. But how many of you out here listening to me know how you do this? So we call it, Dr. Tversky in his book Addictive Thinking calls it the porcupine index. How far out do I have to put my quills to keep you away from me and getting too close? Now, I may banter with you. I might talk with you. I might even ask questions about you, but you're not going to get to know me. I'm not going to let you that close. So he calls it the porcupine index, about how far out are my quills that keep people away. So you've heard me talk, if you've been with me at all, I've talked about the movie Ad Astra. And I do recommend the movie to you. If you don't like science fiction, but if you watch it from a recovery point of view, it's kind of an amazing, I think they really capture the essence of the deeper psychological, emotional aspects of addiction. So Brad Pitt is the star in this, and he's who so what I did is I went and transcribed parts of the movie that I said, oh my gosh, this so captures the stuff we talk about. And so to make this real fast, he's a very disconnected, talented astronaut. And we're in the future a ways. His father is a world-renowned astronaut who's revered by the world, but actually is a very mean and angry man. His wife never speaks a word in this movie, but they do such a good job of showing her dissatisfaction and hurt by his inability to connect emotionally with her. So the first part of the movie, Brad Pitt is now in amongst his fellow astronauts, and it's like a locker room kind of thing for either athletes or whatever, or firefighters, or there's a lot of bantering, stuff like that. So this is him talking, and this is him really describing the porcupine index. He goes, I see myself from the outside. I smile. I present a side. It's a performance with my eye on the exit. Always on the exit. Just don't touch me. Space, I understand. Here I am comfortable. And space to us would be you isolating yourself and being alone. My self-destructive side, that's what she used to say to me. I should feel something. I survived. I should feel something. I'm guessing a lot of us can relate to that. Later in the movie, there's a violent scene in it, and he survives a violent attack, and he's back on the ship safe. And this is him, again, narrating to us, not to anyone in the movie. I understand that rage. I've seen it in my father. I've seen that rage in me. Because I'm angry, he took off. He left us. And again, he's talking about his father. I looked at that anger in me. I pushed that anger aside. All I see is hurt and pain. It keeps me walled off from relationships, from really caring for someone. I don't know how to get past that, to get around that. I don't want to be that man. I don't want to be my father. How many of us have this kind of unresolved, confusing rage in us, the pain, the just the hurt and that we experience? How many of you face the rage of your broken father or mother? How many of you face the abandonment of people who you should have been able to trust? Oh my gosh, for so many of you watching this, you've had so much pain in your life. Maybe it's been in your adulthood even. But wherever it is, it's easy for us to turn that pain onto us and attack us. So we go further in the movie, and now Brad Pitt character is out in space alone. And this is him talking again to us. I'm alone. Something that I always thought I would prefer. I confess it's wearing on me. I've let so many people down. I'm so selfish. I've not been there for others. Good way of talking about shame. So shame is a self-perpetuated, brutal tyranny of ourselves. If you want to look at a myth in your life, that you perpetuate on a regular basis. It's the myth that you are a shameful, loathsome, unlovable, terrible person. Inadequate, not skilled, unlovable. I can go on and on. It's not true. God created you. God is love. What we're seeing is the brokenness from the trauma in your lives, the abandonment in your lives. That's what's created this. When I tell people all the time who were sexually abused as children, the worst thing that sexual abuse does you is it rips out the foundation from under you. You don't know who you are anymore. You lost that. And of course, for most of us, with sexual abuse follows the silence, the denials, the attempt to forget about it, the reckless living we do to harm ourselves because of what happened to us, the confusion, the inability to, we either over-connect with people or we under-connect and do our porcupine index. All this, just total recipes for us to be miserable. And if you can buy that toxic shame really is the key to recovery, you can recover. I always tell people, our addictions really aren't the substances or those crazy compulsive behaviors, all those people we've wrecked our lives with. It's our shame. We're addicted to it. We understand it. We know it. It makes sense to us. It's familiar. I mean, it's like Dr. Vanderkolk talks about in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, is so many times he's seen children who are living in abusive, crazy homes, and yet when they get removed or say they're in a hospital, an emergency room, they want to go back home to it. It's what we know. It's who we see ourselves as. And so I'm trying to help us see that toxic shame is not healthy. It's not normal. It's a myth. And the problem with it is it builds on itself. Because we take all that shame, we turn it against us, and we just keep making mistake after mistake, destructive decision after destructive decision. And the next thing we know, we are kind of a mess. We are a wreck. We in some ways, we deserve not to be happy with ourselves. But that's what we want. Because we want to get to the point where we start saying, I've had enough of this. I can't keep doing this. It's more painful for me to dwell in my hurts, habits, and hang-ups than it is to get clean and sober. And so we just keep wrecking our lives. We keep promising ourselves we're not going to do these crazy things anymore. Or worse, we don't even know we're doing them. We're living with anger. We're being destructive. We're mean. All those things. You don't have to do it. You don't have to do it. And there's a difference between toxic shame and healthy shame. Healthy shame is good. When you have healthy, shame is designed to keep us from repeating mistakes. That's what it's for. If I did something where I was mean and I feel bad about it, there's a pretty good chance I'm not going to do that again. That's what shame is for. It's a roadmap for us to do the right things. Toxic shame is different. Toxic shame says to us, it's a deep-rooted inadequacy, and what it's doing is it's telling us that loathing ourselves, judging ourselves, seeing ourselves unlovable, all things we do, it's like normal. That's what's natural. And we internalize it and we transfer it from our conscious thinking to our subconscious so it becomes who we are. And that's why it's so hard to get rid of it, even though it's really hard to get. And the problem with toxic shame too is that we internalize it and we magnify it. I always talk about how when something good happens, we externalize that. Oh, I was lucky, or, well, it just happened, or whatever. But then when we do something wrong, we talk about how, oh, I can't believe I did that. I'm so stupid. What a fool I am. Like, God, I just can't, right? You hear the difference. And so we accept our low status of unworthiness, even almost subhuman beliefs about ourselves. And let's be honest, we resent others who are successful. And we over-idealize people so they can hurt us too. The problem is that this is so built into us, we really don't know how not to be living with toxic shame. But you're here watching. That tells me you're in recovery at some level or want to be in recovery. So I'm telling you, you can do it. The other problem with this is we've got to figure out ways to lower your cortisol levels. Where when you've been traumatized and abandoned, like most of you have, your cortisol levels are way too high. Cortisol is designed to be there in an emergency, to save you. When, say again, I always use the example, you're driving, someone starts to pull out in front of you, you see it, you slam on the brakes and you skid and your heart rate goes up and you're gasping, and that's what cortisol is for. But for many of you, you're living your life like you're going to be under attack every second of the day. In fact, one of the things they talk about with complex PTSD or long-term PTSD is that you have something called body armoring. You walk around, your muscles are tight, they're tense. You're waiting for the next bad event to happen. That's what toxic shame does to you. It's not real. Yes, there are going to be other things bad happen to you, but probably not to the level that you're living your life. So how do we get ourselves to stop this? How do we get out of this anger, resentment, loathing, self-critical judgment? How do we break this thing? We've got to start figuring out ways to do it. And I hate to tell you, but really there's only a couple ways you can do this. One, big picture, you got to connect with some people, therapists, healthy people, support groups, all those places where they're not going to be afraid to give you feedback about what you're thinking and doing. And more importantly, if you go to support groups, you'll connect with other people who are experiencing the same things. And hopefully some of them are further along so that you can say to yourself, oh, so I can do this too. I know so many people who live their lives thinking they're so unique, thinking they're the only ones, and then they get in support groups and they hear other people talking, and you can see them almost looking with shock and surprise because they're hearing their story. It makes it easier when you don't have to carry this thing alone. It makes it easier when you can put some logic to this, to what you're doing in reaction to what happened to you. There's so much dysfunction out there, and there's so much recovery out there. We just got to get you back. We got to get you out of the dysfunction and into the recovery world. And the recovery world is about as safe places you can go. I don't know how to say it to you. If you haven't ever done it, find something. And so I'm going to just tell us briefly, and we'll stop for today, but there are three things that toxic shame does to us. If you can start seeing these, it will help you. The first one is it's atrophy thinking. I mean, we just figure out ways to see our flaws. We slowly and then more rapidly self-destruct with all this thinking and all these self-statements. We despise ourselves. We despise others. We live in despair and self-hatred. Basically, we just never can get out of our own way. One of the things I like to do to people's, when I talk to them individually, I tell them to start keeping track of how many times they say the word sorry in a day. It really wakes up a lot of people to realize how many times they're saying sorry when they don't need to be sorry. And so atrophy thinking, as it just tells you, we atrophy from inside. Without being checked, trust me, this one gets worse. It doesn't ever get better without some form of intervention. The other one is never enough. No matter what I do, no matter how much I do it, all that stuff, it's never enough. I know people who were, in our thinking, wildly, extravagantly successful financially, career-wise, whatever it is, and they're miserable because they're never enough. It's the never enough that pushes them and promotes them. This is also where we get into our perfectionism. The fact is, a rich, full, meaningful life is not about never enough. A rich, full, meaningful life is developing healthy goals, healthy purpose, and then moving forward and trying to achieve those, leaving behind all the toxic shame in your life. And then the last part is mediocrity. We set a bar, depends on how high you put it, but our bar is here. If we go above it, if we're more successful than that, we will do stuff to sabotage ourselves so that we do not get better than mediocre. And mediocre is painful because A lot of times you can see what could have been. You see the opportunities you could have taken, but you didn't. All those kind of things were built around your need to keep yourself at a mediocre level. Because you have toxic shame, there's no way that you could possibly be successful. So never enough, mediocre, and let's beat ourselves up with atrophy statements and thinking. That's what we do. So I'm going to end this today. We'll talk about this more. I think toxic shame is such an important conversation. But we see ourselves as basically flawed as a person. We either live with too much or too little limits, and we'll talk about that later. Shame becomes our core identity. We cover up our pain. We avoid our pain. I always use Russell Brand's quote, addiction starts with pain and addiction ends with pain. Toxic shame gives us a sense of worthlessness, of never enough, mediocrity. It gives us a sense that we're always failing and we're always falling. But here's what I'm going to end with. God loves you. You are not God, so you're going to screw up. It's okay. That's part of us loving ourselves enough to see life as a process and not as perfection. You are not perfect, and you never will be. You need to see your pain, you need to recognize your pain, and you need to deal with your pain. It will help you to see how the way you see yourself is not real. You have to start somewhere. You are not cursed. You are not stupid. You are not inadequate. Eventually, this is a tough one, but it's true. Eventually, you will see your trauma, your past abandonment as a gift. I know it's hard to hear, particularly if you're new. If you're a little bit further down, you get this one. But the fact is, we cannot turn the clock back. We cannot undo the bad things that happened to you as a child or bad things that happened to you wherever in your life. But we can undo the ongoing, lingering shame that you put with it that keeps you from living your life now in a way that you would love to, and without so much pain and misery and self-judgment. So you've got to learn to accept what's happened to you, put it in proper perspective, forgive if you need to, forgive yourself if you need to, and move on. So I'll stop there. God loves you. You can get past this. You don't have to beat yourself up. You need to start listening to that word of the inner critic in your ear, telling you how worthless you are, all those things. So if you're here locally, we meet on Wednesdays and Fridays at 6:30, Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock. We do the online service, of course, usually Sunday mornings. We have childcare on all three of those meetings. We have a meal for you on Wednesdays and Fridays, so you don't need to go home first. And we have, like I said, we have childcare. So we take away a lot of the reasons not to come. If you're not coming here, it's because of you. We have it set up for you. If you're somewhere not local, understood. I'm glad you're on here. I'd love for you to reach out to me on email at csimpson@wgva.church and let me know you're listening and what's going on in your life. Might be helpful. So we always close our services with the prayer of serenity, and so I'd like to do that now. Again, as we always say, if we would just listen to this prayer and live it, life would be pretty good. So let's close with that. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, expecting one moment at a time, accepting hardships as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that Jesus will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. Again, thank you for joining. Toxic shame does not have to run your life, but you got to start doing something about it. So let me know if I can help you in any way. Great having you join me. Thank you.